First off, a gating question. How many of you have ever bought a native campaign? Those of you who are buyers in the room, show of hands. A couple, actually more than I thought. There's about 10 of you out here, good. For the sellers in the room, how many of you have ever sold a native campaign? About the same number, okay, good. It's actually more than was represented at the Brand Summit. We did a town hall like this at the Brand Summit in Coronado back in September. I'm going to be your Phil Donahue for this. I'm going to come into the audience. I'm going to try to get people to engage with our panelists, our duo up here, with some questions. But first, a framework. For anybody who makes a living in display, it's kind of like 1994 in display for native now. It's really early days, and there's no standardization, there's little standardization, and it's all just being established. But native is growing like mad. It's about to blow up too. There's more brands all the time that are doing it. News outlets, big reputable news outlets, media outlets, CNN, Forbes, The Washington Post, they all have native offerings today. Almost all of them are working with third parties. And if you saw what the Associated Press announced just last Friday, they're going to be offering native as well. So they've cut the subscription rates to newspapers, AP has, and they're offering native via third parties, which is fascinating for the most credible news source for newspapers and others in the country. Native's here to stay, obviously, and the first players who can scale native offerings are going to have a big first mover advantage. The company that Justin founded, Nativo, is one of those, and Gary Milner, who's to Justin's left over here, he's the director of global digital marketing for Lenovo, has a lot of experience with the buying of it, and is one of the guys who's really at the forefront of establishing KPIs. First of all, Justin's going to provide, through a slideshow, some perspectives on native, and then I'm going to ask Gary the first question. We have 6 questions established. We definitely want to get through 3 or 4 of them with the table leaders leading individual conversations at the table, and we're going to then bubble them up back to these guys, okay? So Justin will lead us off here with a little slide presentation. Justin?
Thanks, Mark. Mark said Phil Donahue. I asked for Jerry Springer, but he refrained. So when we talk about native, it's really hard to talk about native as a trend, especially at a conference like this one, without talking about 2 other complementary trends. And that is brands becoming content creators. Yeah, exactly. And the audience shift to mobile devices. These are all key trends that are affecting you guys today. So I don't think anyone who's been here the last few days can argue that brands are thinking about content and becoming and acting like publishers. But why are they doing this? Well, partly it's motivated by the fact that with new platforms like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, you have to have something to say. You can't post a stream of ads and expect to engage those audiences. At the same time, this is something that not everyone thinks about, is that the cost to produce content has come down dramatically. So what you couldn't do with a HD camera that you'd have to spend $1,000 for a few years ago, you can now do with your iPhone 5S. But that also means, because content's very easy to create, everyone's doing it, right? So you have 1,000 new apps in the Apple App Store every day. So for brands creating apps and trying to get discovered, that's a big problem. 400 million tweets per day. Just a lot of noise. If you look at YouTube alone, 100 hours of video uploaded every single minute. Little known fact, 80 of those 100 hours are of cats. But all kidding aside, in a world where content competes for this, ads really stand no chance. And that's the world we're in today. At the same time, what's helped us get to this point is that these new platforms like Twitter, when they decided to monetize their audiences, they really had to think through, how do we do this without hurting user engagement, without harming the user experience? And they didn't choose this path, thankfully. They deployed ads that were native to the experience of their website, less interruptive. And it just so happens these ads work really well on mobile. In fact, our data shows that our native campaigns on mobile perform 50% better than the same campaign on desktop. And native ads work across both. And as Twitter and Facebook have proven, native is a solution for mobile monetization. In addition to that, all the publishers have followed, because not only, I mean, they've been doing native as custom executions for some time, but they're finally at the point now where they've realized the current advertising ecosystem doesn't support their business. So they're looking at native not just because of these other things, all those things matter to them, but it's because they need to do it to be a continuing concern. They need to find these new revenue opportunities, and they've chosen native. So the OPA came out with a survey not too long ago, said 90% of publishers going into 2014 are going to be offering native. So they're not selling native to you guys now, they will be very soon. Luckily for you guys, content and native go together like peanut butter and jelly. This is the most loving version of the photo I could find between peanut butter and jelly. But this raises a lot of questions, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So questions like, who creates the content? Today, largely, it's publishers creating it in the publisher voice. There's some situations where publishers are coordinating with brands, and there are situations with very progressive brands creating the content on their own. And then if brands can create the content, there's questions like, can brands be trusted to write the content? And issues about transparency. I was hoping you guys would laugh at this one. I guess my timing's off. And then, of course, measurement. And that's the final thing, and that's the other thing we're going to talk about today, is how do we measure all of this? So these are the questions, and really the timing is an important time, because as Mark alluded to, this is like banners, the early days of banners, except everything that happened over 20 years with banners is going to happen in 2 years with native. And what you guys say to startups like us is really going to influence what gets built over those 2 years. Thanks, guys. Mark?
Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Justin. When I say early days before, when I said early days before, I wasn't thinking of that compression, but you're right. And the banner market, the display market in 1994-95 was hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe it got to $1 million by the end of 1994. What's native now? $300, $400 million market? It's probably going to be a multi-billion-dollar market by the end of next year, especially with the sort of spread that we're talking about. So this is going to happen very, very quickly. Buyers like Gary are going to be the ones that really drive the KPIs. So I mentioned that we have 3 questions. We're going to start with this one to Gary. And then I'm going to ask you all at your tables to engage on these individual questions, and we'll come around with microphones and then make this interactive as we can. Also, anybody that wants to tweet what you're hearing, what you're learning, feel free to. We had a tweet screen up there before. I don't know if we're going to be able to engage that this time or not. But first question for Gary. For Lenovo, how do you measure the effectiveness of your native ads? What are your KPIs?
So I think it's an interesting discussion. It's probably very variable, depending on the objective of your campaign. So I don't think there's any fixed set metrics in this space right now. I think eventually e-commerce will want to measure what revenue can you get from native ads, but we're some way off that because of attribution. I'll just give you a quick example of a program we just recently run. We're a sponsor of the NFL. So the challenge was, how do we get people into our NFL site and participate in the content that we've got as a joint sponsorship? So we ran a native campaign with The Onion and BuzzFeed. And what we did is produced a set of videos, which is a fictional fantasy football league. Drive into lenovo.com/NFL. If you go there and have a look yourself, click on the bottom, you'll end up in that experience. But these videos involve Matt Forte and Andrew Luck, and they're funny type videos to get the audience engaged in our content, get the audience engaged in our brand. And then The Onion and the players posted on social sites, and also we ran featured tiles on the site and sponsored tiles native inside their content. And then also BuzzFeed took a similar thing to drive traffic to the same area, but they created custom social posts around fantasy football. And they did 4 posts. One of them was 10 ways fantasy is like a mafia movie, 8 signs your spouse may be having an affair with fantasy football, 9 ways to troll a fantasy football fanatic, and then 10 fantasy football owners in every league represented by animals. So I'm not a football fan, by the way, but these things apparently resonate with football fans. So we then drove that into the NFL, Lenovo.com NFL. But the metrics we ultimately ended up coming with was what was the brand lift, and then what traffic did we drive, and then obviously we measured the social engagements underneath it. We saw between a 5 and 15 point awareness, favorability, consideration lift on the brand, through the NFL activities. We saw 80,000 pieces of traffic to the site. We had a social reach of 5 million, 20,000 engagements, 2,000 shares, and we acquired 100,000 emails. So that was, all in the context of that campaign, using those two sites and the players posting off on Facebook and driving traffic in. So we haven't done a whole lot of native, but the next step would be then to take some of that content and then push it even broader with targeting through like Nativo or obviously Facebook as well, and just get these native messages out to a bigger, broader audience. So.
Thank you. Thanks, Gary. When we did this in Coronado, I ran one of the tables. I was the discussion leader or whatever. And the thing that was really fun about that was that there was some serious dissent among a couple of the buyers about what the KPI should be and what should be driven toward. Does everybody know who the table leader is at their table right now? Can table leaders raise their hands? Okay. What should we give? 5 minutes for discussion on this? And then we'll come around with the microphones from the table leaders? 8 minutes? Okay, 8 minutes for discussion. I want to welcome dissent. That's part of this, okay? So if you have an opinion that is different from those in your table, let's hear it, okay? Give about 7, 8 minutes for this first question.
I've only got 3 written down here. Email.
It's post-lunch, that's all. I think people liked it. They're just not going to hear a laugh because it's post-lunch. I was just saying that
only cats get laughs, apparently.
I've got a great video for my keynote, because I did TubeMogul's keynote, and I said, okay, you guys, you've come to see TubeMogul as the platform for video. I says, but I've got the number 2 emerging platform, and there's the video called Catvertising. Have you seen it? Yeah. So I show that as a video. I says, these are the guys you really need to watch, not TubeMogul, just to set the thing up. And people love that, the cat spinning around on the fan and stuff.
Very funny. David Berkowitz he has this whole cat meme. He's a site for cats and video and whatnot. It's just hilarious. Can't get enough of that shit. Well, did you see the show of hands on the buyers and sellers? I always do that at the beginning of one of these things. There were at least 10 of each.
Oh,
buyers
surprising.
and sellers. Yeah.
How surprising on the buy side there's 10. That's great.
Yeah.
I was going to make a joke. I said, everyone who didn't raise your hand. Maybe. Only maybe.
You haven't lost that many people. It's just a couple of tables.
Yeah.
We had more at Coronado. Well, you were there.
Mm-hmm. That was a bigger event, though, wasn't it?
I guess. I don't know.
Slightly bigger, I think. Didn't you present?
One of these is gin. I forget which one.
Cheers.
Perfect.
Didn't you
Oh, we had
present?
one here.
Didn't you present more about your product last time?
I did, and decided to make it more native.
Right. We'll probably look you up anyway, right? They'll probably look you up if you don't present.
Yeah, I mean, really, our goal truly is thought leadership. If we build a great product, ultimately we're talking to every agency, and we really are a tech platform.
Yeah.
We are powering both the publisher side, so if the category grows, it's good for us.
Right.
So
the problem with this stuff is no scale on this. Like, this is custom built.
Yeah,
right?
we don't do. So that's where we've spent a lot of time building tech, like literally 3 years of development. Yeah. So it mass customizes on the fly.
Right.
But
you could take this and post it. Some of it you could be posted out, right?
And with analytics control, you could play pause, you can do all that stuff. So everything's going to head there. We're maybe 8 months ahead of everyone else, but everything's going to get there.
Yeah, I need to get you guys on the phone to the UK and US team just to take them through this stuff.
Are you Irish?
English.
Oh,
Northeast.
sorry.
So I talked to the digital guy in the US who didn't know who you were. I said Nativo, and he thought I said TiVo. He started talking about TiVo and how they'd done something else. I says, no, it's not TiVo, it's Nativo. I don't know where you get that ever before of everyone else, but
Hasn't. I think about TiVo, but that's funny. So you based? Where are you based?
in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
I do,
You're in California somewhere, right?
yeah, we California, New York. So I'm in like New York about a quarter of the time.
And whereabouts in California?
We're actually moving. So I have a few companies, and this new one was incubated inside the other ones. Now it's moving from downtown Long Beach to El Segundo. Like literally, like if you come by the airport, you had to make us your first or last meeting because we're right there.
Right. You don't know Tim Eads, do you?
What's that?
Tim Eads? You don't
Tim
know?
Meads?
Eads.
Eads. No.
He's in the security space, startups. He's sold off Silvertail was his last company. He's in San Francisco.
You spend much time outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, or do you at home base a lot?
Depends. The last 3 weeks I was presenting keynotes for T-Mobile in Italy and in Napa.
Oh.
And then I'm here, so I've been away.
He's a designated speaker.
Yeah, well, I talk about the industry. I don't talk about T-Mobile, like how they fit into where I see things going. So that's where it's good for them because they get brands and then they get trading desks in.
Are you? How long have you been at Lenovo?
For 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're a veteran. So wait, how could you be there 20 years? You mean pre-IBM acquisition?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I did brand management for ThinkPad. I've done all sorts of
so you
different
were at
jobs.
IBM prior?
Yeah.
Wow.
I worked in Paris as ThinkPad brand manager, then launched here. Worked with the communications teams on the traditional media for a long time. Worked on websites, collateral. I've done it all. Worked on the channel.
You must have done everything.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's a rarity these days. you
Yeah.
know, to be that deep in a brand. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I've seen it all, done it all. And the trouble is you get to see the same thing coming up again. You think, why are you doing that? You know, it's like, they think they've got a good idea. Well, yeah, we did that 15 years ago. Although digital is mostly new stuff. That's a good thing about it.
The problem with digital I see happening, because we did this when I had a mobile social game business and we had like 50 million players, so we bought a lot of Facebook ads. And what I learned from that was you have to create so many different variations and create, like if you're not like narrowing down to do mass, it's so hard. You have to just like we would run an ad, and literally after 1 week it would decay in performance unless we changed it, the color or something.
I think some stuff decays even faster.
Got about a minute and a half, everybody. We're going to gather these up in about a minute and a half.
Massive low cost.
I know. And the agencies are starting to do that. There are some like content agencies now that are specializing in producing like multiple content per day type of thing.
Right.
For cost, being cost effective, but I don't know. At some point, you just have to produce. And people are making software too to like A/B test creative.
Yeah. The thing is that quite often the agency's not deep enough in the brand to build this stuff either. Cause
I know, they kind of, between you and me, they hold a weird middle ground. Like they're not deep on the brand, and they're not deep enough on the brand sometimes, and they're not deep enough on the tech.
Yeah.
So they kind of like just.
There's a spelling mistake on there. It doesn't say conversation. Unless it's meant to say conversation.
When I was up on stage last time, there was like a real negative tweet that came up in the middle of someone asking me a question, and it distracted me because I was reading the tweet.
Oh, okay.
I didn't realize. It was one of those where like people were like, Justin, someone asked you a question? I was like, what?
Okay, everybody. That finishes round one, the first question. We got Catherine and I believe Jennifer with microphones. Jennifer's over there.
Can you hear what he's
Any of you table leaders want to?
Yeah, we got one over here.
Got one over there.
Okay.
Shh. Now it's time to share with everyone.
Okay, so our table had a pretty interesting discussion that very confused about native advertising. We brought up the word advertorial, sponsorships, all these different kind of components. We had one metric of views. We had people talking about, bounce rate on web pages. Well, if we're putting content out there, we don't want them to bounce. So is there, does bounce rate become a metric? So there's a lot of confusion around what native advertising is, and then figured each variation of it that we thought of had a different metric.
So I'll chime in there. Part of the confusion around what is native is that as soon as the buzzword became really popular, a lot of companies adopted it. And I personally counted maybe 8 startup pivots toward native as soon as the term took hold. So there is a lot of things that aren't native that people are describing to be native. And I think native is one of those things that when you're someone who's really part of the audience of the site, you could tell when an ad feels native. You experience the advertising the same way you experience the other content. So both in similar appearance, doesn't have to be the same, but similar appearance, but more importantly, the same interaction as the other content. That's what's native. So part of what's confusing it is that definitions getting broadened by a lot of different companies into things that aren't necessarily native. I think what would actually help the issue is that if we clarified what's in-stream versus what's native. What Yahoo's doing is not really native. When you click on an ad and you click out to a landing page to fill out a form on someone else's site, we consider that to be more of an in-stream experience because the user's not expecting to go to another site when they click on something that looks like an article. So that helps clarify things. As far as metrics then I think you could use similar metrics to what you would use around other content in terms of measuring its effectiveness. So you can do things like engagement time, whether or not they clicked on the article to read it. You can look at if there's other elements within the article and measurements against those. You can also, the ads that we do, you can also click out to a landing page or click out to another site. We also track those as well. Whether or not they shared the content. So those are all the metrics that we look at, and part of the confusion is, again, that the definition is being broadened by all these companies jumping onto the term.
How would you address the definitional differences with what people call advertorial in this? I think of advertorial as a print notion that has to be called out. So with regard to native, if it's called out as native,
right,
and it's owned by the publisher and it looks the same, then that's almost synonymous, but that's different than something that scales across many sites. And native, by its definition, should be able to go across multiple sites.
Well, I think native by its definition, you could almost use the word custom. So if it's native to the site, it is custom to the site, and that's hard to scale. That's why it's hard to build technology to make native scale across different publications. But it is achievable. I mean, that's the problem we're solving, is allowing you to do mass customization on the fly. As far as the term advertorial.
But what's the issue with sponsored? It seems like when you get a digital and having sponsored content inside the content is a bad thing, but it's been around forever on television. It's been around forever on print. Because it goes to digital, there's something wrong with it. I struggle with that.
But I'm not sure that there's a dismay around it being in digital versus print or television. I think it's the terminology. That's what Peter was talking about. And I've heard this a lot from people I've spoken to as well. It's just advertorial. Well, it's similar. There are similarities. But when you scale it, it's really quite different than advertorial.
It's different because native, not every site. So as an example, would you consider a promoted tweet advertorial? Right. Would you consider, I think advertorial brings up long form content within a magazine, and that's why I struggle with applying. Now, you could say that some executions, like a sponsored article, you could use the term digital advertorial, and it wouldn't necessarily be wrong, but I think that the definition is too narrow. If you have a promoted pin on Pinterest, that I wouldn't consider an advertorial, but I'd certainly consider that native.
Let's go to one more question with Jenny, and then we can move on to the next question for the group.
So I think we were struggling with the definition as well, and I don't know, I've heard a lot of mention of different, advertorial versus fitting within, the type of content of a site. Could you actually define it for us in like one sentence? How would you define native?
It's where the advertiser's content or message fits within both the form and function of the other content of the website.
Okay. So we talked about a lot of different metrics, and I think maybe to your point earlier, I think the metrics would definitely be determined by the objective of a campaign, and that's not going to be easily generalized across all efforts. We talked about engagement as being a KPI and whether that engagement happens on a publisher site versus trying to pull someone back to a .com for a deeper site engagement on a brand site. That was a little arguable. We talked about viewability as potentially being something worth measuring, and then also we talked about sales and sort of the closed loop studies that are kind of being put into market through Datalogic's, Nielsen Catalina via Twitter and Facebook, and that being a way to ultimately look at ROI. So lots of different metrics came up for us.
It's funny you mentioned some of the data providers, Datalogic's and Catalina. Catalina's been doing what they've been doing offline with inserts and like Color Sunday inserts, measuring effectiveness with coupons and whatnot for 40 years, something like that. Here along comes Datalogic's more recently, and they're marrying that with preference card data and building these huge models against it and trying to actually ascertain the effectiveness based on purchases in real time, like really, really quickly. It's amazing how fast this is all changing. Datalogic's hasn't been doing this very long. Catalina's been doing it for 40 years. And now they're like we talked about this 20-year aperture narrowing to 2. What Facebook is doing on the back end of this is going to make them this enormous pull platform. People wonder how Facebook advertising can work. How about Facebook only does metrics around how well other advertising has worked? It's still going to be this enormous opportunity. That's a whole other different town hall. That's really interesting stuff. Thank you. Thanks, you guys.
I'll just chime in real quick. Just some thoughts that could be helpful. Think of native as, one, you're actually no longer competing with the content for the user attention. You're actually part of the content stream, so you have a chance to engage the user. The other thing to think about is that the number one reason people cite for not clicking on a banner ad, even if it's relevant to them, is that they don't want their experience interrupted. So it allows you to, in a non-interruptive way, to engage a user. We know that works because we're finding 60 seconds average time on content for all the campaigns that we've ever done. So once people choose to engage, they're deeply engaged. The other thing we're finding too is a bounce rate is less than 3%. So compare that to whatever landing page campaigns you've done, it is phenomenally lower. And that's because the user has a different mindset when they click on an article. They know they're going to stay on the site, they can consume the content, and they can go back to doing whatever they were doing. Good. Okay, next discussion topic. And I'll open this one with Gary as well, if that's okay. Where does native fit into your digital ad mix? Where should it fit now, and where do you see it going?
I think from our perspective, it's very much it's a test environment. Where do you start testing content and pushing content out in a different way? I think it actually causes new opportunities that we haven't had before. So an example would be, PR, right? So all of a sudden, the PR team can suddenly take their content and then mass distribute that against the relevant context and content they're trying to drive. And it's something they haven't thought about. We sat down with them and said, well, we had to silhouette a campaign, PR campaign to launch a product. And we sat down and said, well, you can launch video online. You can also do some native advertising. So I think that's the sort of opportunity that's going to be coming in the future is beyond just the normal brand campaign. It can support many, many different things. But how an organization gets its head around that and how to allocate budgets to it is going to be the challenge. Because the PR team think everything's free.
Yeah, the major PR firms, I think almost every global PR firm now does some sort of buying around this. When you hear someone like Edelman, which is the largest independent PR firm in the world, saying that they intend to allocate X million dollars to this and hire 500 people against it, It's fascinating because you would think that this is an apples and oranges construct, but to them it's not. To anybody that puts a press release on the wire, it's not. You don't put a press release on the wire thinking that a reporter is going to generate some sort of article from that press release. The press release is its content. That's it. That's what it's there for. You can link to other articles. But the last time a reporter built an article based on a press release that you put on the wire, I think it was about 1998. It hasn't happened in a long time. I try to tell clients this all the time. I own a PR firm, that's why I'm saying this. It's been a long time since reporters did that. So, okay. Back to the tables for another 7 or 8 minutes. Where does native fit into your digital ad mix today? Where should it fit, and where do you see it going?
So we had the conversation, like they freaked out and said, we got to spend money to get PR. Like, they have a PR budget.
Yeah.
But mentally then taking some of that PR budget and putting it into, say there's this whole frame of advertising. It's advertising, right? But it's really a different form of PR, right? I mean, the PR of old, the thing is, the new PR, if you go online, as you said, it's got a half-life of a day or 2 days, and it's gone.
Yep.
So their message doesn't stay there, right? So it allows them to continue their message out over time. I mean, I've seen articles where, you know, the PR team think they've got this great review. It says it's only had 8,000 people read it.
Right.
You've got to get people to it.
Yeah.
You haven't. The job isn't done just by putting something up.
Right.
And this is probably not just our company, but there's a whole host of
The
PR
PR companies are, like MSL, Edelman, they're actually putting dollars through us. It's weird because like we
Right.
did a Procter & Gamble campaign,
That's
and
a
then
good
we'll get
idea.
one agency.
Yeah.
They are doing paid media dollars. There's this collision happening. PR understands stories, so they're trying to put
Right.
paid media dollars. The agency's trying to write content. The publishers are acting like agencies because they're trying to on your
But
behalf.
then you've got a creative agency that does these creative executions that are not always very broad, right? So you've got all these different things happening. To me, at the end of the day, it's down to the same order to pull all this stuff together, right?
I think someone on the brand side has to strategically.
Yeah, you think of the Small
take a
Business
step back.
Saturday campaign, you know, the Amex thing. You got a lot of things going on in there, but it's all working together, and that's a very different skill set, and so mostly digital now than you had before.
They outsourced all that content writing.
Yeah. Well, there's a few. L'Oreal outsource a lot of their stuff to Demand Media, right?
Amex used to have a contract years ago with Federated, and Federated produced as like a newsroom. Now there's new startups. Like you should talk to like Contently, Newscred. They're
Who are
actually
they called?
Contently. I'll do an intro for you. They actually produce. They have a platform where the professional journalists are in there, and you could put out like writing assignments, and they're like $500, $200. You'll get articles back.
I'm trying to set up some. Will you be at CES?
Well, yes.
We're trying to set up some meetings there, so we should get you. We should try and get a meeting with the PR team as well as probably a few other people. The US media team will be there, but we should see who else. The product launch team probably should meet because they don't even get this stuff, right? Because then they can push. They can then push other people to do things, right? Sometimes, if they don't understand, part of the job is educating what the tool sets are, so that other people can push it. So not just me pushing it.
Right.
So we should get some meetings set up, at least one meeting set up with a bunch of people.
That'd be great. Are you there the whole week?
We're usually there like Monday to Thursday or something.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Yeah, I'm there for the whole show.
yeah. Usually get there a day early, and I usually leave for Friday morning.
Do you even go walk the show anymore?
No, I haven't done that for years. When it used to be running over a weekend, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I used to go early and play golf.
That's
Monday,
nice.
Tuesday, and then do the show stuff, and then I'd still leave Friday night. But now they've switched it. The show's Tuesday to Friday. I never get to play golf unless I stay on the Saturday or Sunday. And by then I've had enough anyway. So
You're a big golfer?
I used to be. God, not right now. I'm off about 15 now, and God, I can be 8. I can be 25. Going through a hard. I'm moving to a golf course. That'll help.
You are moving to a golf course?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
Wait, North Carolina. Which?
Pinehurst.
Okay.
That's where the US Open's next year.
Okay. Wow, that's awesome.
a lot of
So you're gonna golf every weekend.
Yeah, I'm more interested in the practice ground. You know, going around 2 minutes away and 30 minutes. It's the time consumption that's the problem.
Well, if you ever have time and you're gonna come by either Orange County, LA, and you're gonna have a free day, my buddy is. They're both very early members of the one. Phil Mickelson's a member. It's Grand. It's in Rancho Santa Fe. It's North San Diego. But anyway, there's only like 50 members.
Huh.
He took me there once. It felt like like the Bellagio when they go over the top.
Yeah.
He's ran into Phil Mickelson a lot.
Right.
There's 2 PGA members there.
I played Riviera, and that was interesting. I mean, obviously, it's a very expensive place to play, but very down to earth, I found. I've played Pelican Hill, which is in Orange County.
Yeah, I live near there.
Yeah, that's a good golf course, actually. And that's owned by the Marriott. Anyone can play there. I think there are only 2 places I've played in LA. Played quite a few in San Diego.
We every time they hook it up because they're one of the guys is an angel investor. So anytime.
No.
I'm not very good.
Yeah, it's a hard game, you know. I'm frustrated with it now because when you play to a certain level and you got worse and you just can't quite work it out, it's like, and the pros have this problem as well. You know, you read books on it and some of them have to quit playing.
So do you really enjoy it, or is it just more like a mental challenge?
I actually enjoy just being out. You know, I sometimes go after work at 6:30, I'll tee off and I'm out my own in the countryside. That's what I like. I don't play the competitions anymore because if I can't be competitive, I don't play the competitions. But I can still just enjoy playing, right?
So you were pretty good if you used to be competitive.
I used to be.
Wow.
Well, I used to play for the team in England, when I was the club team in England.
Wow.
So I've won trophies and I've done, but couldn't win anything right now. It's terrible. So, but I'm not going to give up the game. My dad's 79 and still plays. He's 79. It's one of the few things you can do as you get older.
It's funny because I love hitting balls on the range. It's so gratifying. But when I go on the course,
Yeah.
I just feel like
Make sure you play an easier golf course, and that's part of the problem. My home course is really difficult. It's not very forgiving.
it'll make you good. It'll make you good.
Yeah, it makes it easier to go anywhere else, that's for certain. It's funny, I played Riviera and I played with the guy who runs the tourism board, I forget his name now. And the club's very unpretentious, but we were a 4-ball and there was a 6-ball playing behind us. They're all from Korea, or from Korean origin. And they didn't hit the ball very far at all, and they were all running. It was the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. 6 people come up the fairway, hitting the ball, running, hitting the ball, running. They went past us, went through us.
Why
6-ball went
why
through
did
a
they
4-ball.
run? Is it because they
I think
didn't want to
it's
hold
like
people
power.
up?
They want to get around quickly. It's power golf. I think this is what they do. They probably play a 2-hour round. I've been passed through by a 6-ball. It was like a new experience.
But
One of these didn't get open? Oh, this one?
yeah.
All right, everybody.
All right.
Do we have scintillating conversations?
Yeah.
Catherine, do you have a volunteer out there?
Yes, we have a volunteer to share with the group. Don't make me shush you again. Just kidding.
I'll shush. Hand goes up, mouth goes shut. I'm Charlie Ray at Broad Street, and our table talked about this. And currently, when we talked about native advertising, we didn't have a budget allocation for it. But if it made sense and was going to fit somewhere, then it became part of the overall media budget. And we talked about right now the first place it probably comes from is search, because it's most similar to search. And then the other thing was it's most closely aligned with search in the way that we thought about it. Let me put content, though, that was the interesting conversation we had, is that content comes from the marketing budget and is not part of our media budget, but the placement of it and the responsibility to place it comes from the media budget. So that was the good news when we were talking about doing it, is that we didn't have to worry about producing it. That came from marketing and wasn't our budget.
Jenny's got someone.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about the fact that there is no one place where native budgets live. I think one of the main points or thoughts that we concluded was it really comes to who's leading the charge strategically for native, and in talking to the group around the table, that really varies. Again, depending on the group, whether it's on the client side or the agency side. Sometimes native budgets are collaboration between the social department and the media department, and we kind of just decide how much of it's going to native, and then we figure out what we each have in terms of the rest of our budget. So that's one way we've seen it happen in our organizations, but a lot of it ties back to who's leading it, and then it tends to go to that budget is what we've been seeing, at least so far.
All
It's
right,
interesting, yeah, thanks.
another one here.
So we had pretty good group consensus at our table, perhaps not consensus around the room here, but we feel that it is just part of the digital budget, digital ad budget, and so it doesn't replace anything. It doesn't replace search, it doesn't replace video, it doesn't replace paid social amplification. It's another tool in the toolbox that we use to see, we check and see how it performs similar to any other digital tactics that we do, and we optimize based on the same KPIs that we use for the rest of the digital campaign. So it's not a replacement, it's not a either or, it's just an and.
I would think that'd be very difficult for a lot of organizations. That's a great idea, and in practice makes wonderful sense. I would think that there'd be more like what we heard before, where there'd be fiefdoms and people not necessarily wanting to share. Justin, do you find that you deal more with one? I'm sorry?
We all get along at our table.
Do you? I mean, comment on this. Do you think that there's one or the other that you've seen at Nativo? I mean, do you get more from one department or the other?
Yeah, it's really interesting, the fragmentation of landscape. So just to summarize what I heard from that table, thank God we don't have to make the content. And I heard from that table, we all agree on that it fits into the mix just like anything else. The way we think about it, the way we think about content in general, not just necessarily native, is that content is a better top of funnel type engagement than a display ad would be. You can get deeper, richer storytelling. You just have more space. You have a more engaged user. So I would argue that it is part of the mix, but unlike it being search, which I would say is the bottom of the funnel, it could be your first engagement to draw new users in, to tell a story, to change minds. What we're seeing is that no one knows who should make the content. And just like that table, not everyone's excited to jump on the content creation responsibility. What I think, and we were actually just talking about this on stage, is that where I see everything going is that PR companies are actually now putting paid media dollars behind their PR efforts. You have agencies all talking about creating content arms, some already doing it. You have publishers acting like agencies in some cases. I mean, effectively, BuzzFeed does a lot of that. They help drive traffic to the content they're creating. You have some brands hiring writers away from publishers to write content in-house. There's like this, and then there are startups that are just specifically being built now to help brands create content. And so you have this kind of ecosystem forming. I think what's going to come out of it is that there's going to be certainly a lot more content created, but everyone is kind of like, if you look at a Venn diagram, everyone's kind of crossing over. And so today, what we run into is by the time we get a campaign, it's a media planner saying, that's great, we want to do it, we believe in content, let's see what I got. And there's nothing really strategic behind that. And typically they work with us because the brands have created a lot of content and they want to drive some discovery around it. But when agencies and brands, and I think this is maybe still a year away, really figure out that strategic connection between the creative piece, really beginning with the storytelling of the brand and the product and whatever you guys are doing, and then get that paid, and know that you can have a paid piece to amplify that, and those two connect seamlessly, then I think the promise of native truly comes to life at that point.
So I think the brand agencies need to step up and think in the framework of their campaigns, what does a native campaign look like? I think a lot of them aren't doing that today. from our perspective, what we're doing inside the media, because we have a creative agency and a media agency, we're saying to the media agency, when you go to the premium suppliers, where we pay top dollar CPM, we just don't want you to buy impressions. We want you to think about, are you developing content that may match the brand campaign, but it may actually be a campaign in its own right, like this NFL stuff. So we actually develop native content, or content that can then be distributed across platform type areas. It could be video, it could be native. So there's different areas where content can get built. And the other area is the social teams who don't have any media money, and that's where you run into problems. They'll come up with some ideas, they organically catch on, they want to boost them, and there's no budget, because the brand campaigns guys are sitting over here with their brand campaign and don't necessarily want to give dollars back to the social. So you've got all these frictions and things going on, which I think over time will shake out, but that's just where we are as an industry.
Yeah, I think the final thought there is that when the brands start thinking about first content, just content itself as the message, and then think of their social channels and their website as owned properties. If they get any sharing and virality, that's great. There's your earn. They need to think about the paid piece, and they're not thinking about it enough today, but I think they will down the road. So content should come first, and then you have your owned, earned, and paid channels to get that content out there.
Can I ask a question of
We
table?
have one more table here.
Oh, back there, okay.
Hi, Leslie Tettenser from Questus. So I think one of the things that we're all seeming to agree on, and certainly we did at this table, is that there really isn't a cookie cutter approach to it. It really depends on what you're trying to achieve within your campaign. So I think one of the things that kind of rose to the top was when you're trying to achieve authenticity, legitimacy, and credibility. Certainly when you're in a space where there's experts and experts are speaking within the voice that your brand is trying to speak within, then that's most valuable.
So using it for thought leadership, is that, I mean, it sounds like that's the PR approach, yeah. Back to the PR approach. It's a segue to, I was going to ask a question. Thank you, Leah. I was going to ask a question from table 10, or of table 10. If you have it all in the same pool, all the different tactics, all the different segments that you're covering, and you say you measure them against the same KPIs, is PR part of that?
I can only speak for Xbox. PR is a separate arm of ours, but we work collaboratively together. We are closer to, say, the social team. So Amanda and I were just having a conversation about how do you give up dollars to the social team? It's like we sync every single week. We know what their messaging is. We prioritize it. We have a budget, and we amplify. And we look at the places where we can amplify. So there's a tremendous amount of collaboration between who's building the digital creative, where are we placing it, what content do we have, where is it going, how many dollars do they need for production, for custom. There's just a constant, I wouldn't say it's easy, but there's a constant week in and week out collaboration on where to put the monies in terms of content creation, custom, standard, digital amplification. It's not that hard.
No, I mean, it's heavy lifting. It definitely is. It's maybe not that hard once you have the systems put into place, the processes put in place.
But it requires weekly contact,
right.
Conversations about what's the priority. It's a prioritization exercise, but it's not fiefdoms for us.
Right. And when you say you optimize, something's working exceedingly well, then you'll put more to it.
That's right.
Right. And by the exceedingly well, I'm not thinking that's probably clicks. If you're as sophisticated
and we may have native
as it sounds.
placements that work well and others that don't. So
Right.
it's a constant optimization. It's not is native working or not. It's like certain parts of it are working better than others, just like any other digital tactic we use. It's not a one size fits all.
Right. Yeah, you take this for granted. You obviously work within a very sophisticated organization. We work with a number of companies that would love to be that when they grow up, but they don't necessarily even know. Most of the companies that and it's kind of a blanket statement, most of the companies in interactive that spend money on marketing have no idea how to calculate a cost per lead basis. Most, not a few, I mean most. So what you're talking about is way more sophisticated than most of the $10 to $20 million companies in our space.
By the way, we actually don't get down to a cost per lead. I mean, we're working more upper funnel because everything drops off when we hand off the sale to a retailer.
Okay. So you're doing it on clicks then, by and large.
Engagements, and then studies that allow us to take a look at our KPIs of purchase intent. Consideration and purchase intent are usually what our
Okay.
key KPIs are.
Okay, that makes sense. That's good. Thank you. All right, we got one more question, I believe. And I'm the guy with the clicker.
That was very tweetable, by the way. Content, it's not that hard. That was awesome.
Number 3, what's holding you back from more native advertising spend? And it might be something as simple as the accountability in the back end. Gary, what do you think it is? You say you're still in the testing phase?
I think every brand and company is going to be slightly different, but we discussed this yesterday, and I think for us the key thing is content, like having the right streams of content to be then putting against an advertising budget, and we've got a brand agency that isn't particularly switched on in terms of developing story content beyond the traditional types of spots. And as they change their mindset, I think we will end up forcing that issue a lot more than we are today. But it's where you get content from. That's why we're encouraging the media companies we work with to be building content related to our products and our initiatives, so we have more streams of content coming in so we can actually make the decision, because we don't have teams of people sitting around building content for us internally. So that will be the big switch on. As soon as we get that, we can start scaling and testing very quickly.
Yeah, it needs a home, right? Okay, so now we have another 7-8 minutes, table by table, and then we'll sum up at the end. We'll have some Q&A. So please, talk among yourselves.
We can't get collaboration because they all have different agendas sometimes. So you might have a product launch. Saatchi's building a brand campaign, but the PR team then go off and do some other variation, right?
Yeah.
The social team build their own social content. The e-com team's off doing something different. Then who's got the priority on the budgets and what's been spent where? Obviously the media team at the end of the day decide between TV and all the other things. Which content do you focus on? Do you go and do social? Do you go and do online video? Do the PR team get any money at all for their stuff? And unless you got someone really strong in charge of marketing and the geography, then which they may have, who understands all this, then it runs into problems, right? No.
One agency here, and the smaller agencies just tend to have been moving faster, but they talk about how like they sit with the client and they plan out the story arcs for the year, and then they get social PR and everything. Like they know what the story is at least.
Right.
So when they all create creative, they're telling the same stories.
But I think the other thing is, in the old days, print would sit around for a lot. The shelf life of a print magazine was there, whereas you know how long a tweet lasts, and it's very couple of hours, right? And that's digital. I mean, digital articles get pushed down the page. Look at your Facebook, unless you're posting it back every day, and that's why I think the whole area of PR is different now. You actually do need to be spending money on the content to keep it in the public eye. Yeah. And one of these days it'll all be a big digital ecosystem, TV and everything. You'll just be able to plan it all out, and you'll know exactly what's driving what. I don't know, 10 years, 20 years.
Yeah. You'll be able to check your marketing dashboard in your flying car.
Yeah, with Google Glasses.
That's right.
Companies like MediaMat kind of stuff, marketing automation. We'll see. I'm gonna go move around a little bit. I gotta go Jerry Springer.
There you go. Do the paternity joke. Thanks again for filling in.
I'll buy you a drink if you can
Yeah, no, I saw
successfully
that.
explain me how search advertising is like native. Yeah, they're nothing like each other.
Look at the guys responding, guessing.
So it's like search in the sense that it should be contextually related, but not in
Search-
terms of how you place it.
Yeah, it's not in terms of strategy. I mean, search ads are technically native to the search experience. So you could call them native ads, but it's not, yeah, search is definitely a different mindset. The
You know
users-
what we do at the NFL is only native in the sense of it was funny, jocular type thing in the Onion, right? So it wasn't a NFL. There's people who watch NFL go to the Onion, but it's not contextually related to the NFL. It's contextually related to the type of content it was, right? Which was this fictional fantasy football league. It wasn't a real one.
Right.
You can't even enter it. You can win prizes on our fantasy football league, but it's how you do in other people's. We haven't set our own fantasy football league. There's no point. You can't compete with other people. So we've tapped into other people's and we give prizes away. I think Yahoo's or something.
Really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Are you guys very consumer focused? Isn't Lenovo very business
No,
focused?
we're after consumer. All our brand money's on consumer. We're in Best Buy. We're in Staples.
What'd you think of the Toshiba campaign with that movie?
It's a good campaign. I just don't quite get why Toshiba's done it, but I just don't get Toshiba's advertising. It's just, on the one hand, they're very DR-centric, and then they do that. So I don't know what impact it would have had. I mean, Intel are always doing these high-level things. Always they spend a fortune on this stuff.
You know, I wonder because when they proved it, they had sales data, but never know what the connection is, right?
Maybe they did go, but their market shares, they need nothing to shout home about, right? It hasn't changed the company positioning dramatically.
Right.
So I don't know how much they put on it.
I don't know. I guess in an ideal world, you know the brand story even before you create the product. You know what I mean? So the product fits the story.
I tend not to follow Toshiba. They're not really in the radar screen of, you know,
It's amazing how they used to be.
Dell and HP, us and Apple really are the four. And Dell and HP are disinvesting from consumer.
That's crazy how things change so fast. I remember when I was selling computers, you know, Toshiba was the #1 reputation laptop.
Scale though now, you can't, if you don't get volume in Asia, you can't be in this business.
You mean volume like selling in Asia?
Yeah. So if we're 45% market share in China, and then significant in India, I mean, our economies of scale globally are huge because we already got a good, decent share in Europe.
Right.
Dell never got in break. So you don't get the volume, so you don't get. Good. That's where Apple's going to have a problem with phones as well. Right?
With what?
The phones, smartphones, outside US. If you look at their share outside US, it's not very healthy. But as the volumes keep going up and the components go down, like other people start getting more and more volume, which Android's already overtaken.
They can negotiate better deals and components.
How are they going to keep the price point where they are? Because phones are expensive now, they're going to come down in price. You're not going to have a $500. Effectively, your phone's $500. You get a subsidized phone. Between $300 and $500. That's not what last. I mean, did you read that?
All right, everybody.
Google.
We're ready for Final Jeopardy, everybody.
All right.
The price of phones now.
We're gonna sum these up. We're gonna have a couple of the summary remarks,
Dislocated.
and then if there are any questions at the end, we'll entertain the questions. So, for starters, please.
All right, Jason from Chemistry in Pittsburgh. We talked a lot about the issue of risk when it comes to content. And clients, in some cases, not willing to take that risk with content that's really necessary for the target that they're after. So, you know, thinking of like 18 to 25-year-olds, you might need something a little bit more risky, and in some cases, at least some of the clients that we work with aren't willing to take those risks. So that's one thing that we think is holding it back. Another piece of this is the resources that are actually available on the client side, obviously is a big factor. And even when it comes down to contractual limitations that they have with maybe even a call center. So maybe a call center, we're sending more traffic there, we're sending more people to the call center, but in reality, the call center has a contract to lower the amount of time that they spent with people on the phone and limit the amount of calls that are coming into that. So there's conflicting kind of things that happen here when you're driving that. So those were some of the things.
Good, good, thank you. Yeah, the risk is a big one, I would think. Jennifer?
Okay. All right. Well, we had a very interesting conversation that I would need about 30 minutes to then reiterate to everyone, so I will make this short. Overall, the development costs for native advertising may be a deterrent because you have to be able to prove the ROI against the cost to actually develop the content. Two, the overall digital budget growth and its siloed nature. Third, it being held to a higher standard of proof, and that's just across the digital media mix. We have our own ways of siloing ourselves out and then putting ourselves in a corner. And then largely, the need for an organizational change and shared values and how media should be approached collaboratively instead of the way that it's kind of being solid out right now.
That gets back to my friend at table 10 before. Where if you collaborate, it all makes more sense, right? Over here, there's one more.
Yeah. So it's three areas that we think we all came into agreement with. One area would be starting with the client, like educating the client in a way where they understand the risk that's needed. They empower the agency to create content in a timely manner and distribute it. Because a lot of times, if clients have a long approval process, by the time the content is launched, it could be irrelevant. And I guess Twitter's the best example of that. The Oreo case study would never have been in existence if Oreo didn't give the agency the power to tweet something, at that moment. If there was an approval process, obviously, it would already be over with. So things like that. Another is the resource challenge. I think once you get to a point where you can create content, the type of person that creates content is a very unique type of writer and knows the voice of the publisher you're running the content on through native advertising. So it's really important for a writer to have that sort of skill set, which is very different than just probably a traditional copywriter. And then lastly is probably measurement. I think we need to get to a point, it's part of the education process as well, but like if we get more case studies and understanding how native advertising has done well and start thinking about new metrics and really evaluating the effectiveness of native advertising, that we'll get to a point where we'll understand like native is actually very different than how we should be measuring your digital banners versus your rich media, and then we'll be able to move the needle towards native advertising moving forward.
So probably something that you can answer, but when I think of native, the challenge I think media companies have had is where do you go to get scale? Because display ads, it's about scale. Video, it's about scale. Digital tends to be about scale and not micro content. Even search is scale. So, I first heard of your company like 2-3 months ago. I wasn't really aware that there's that many opportunities to do big scalable native ads. Do you think that's something that's holding the industry back?
Definitely, and part of the reason why we're here sponsoring iMedia. Look, we happen to be so we started off trying to solve this problem not from a native advertising standpoint. We started off and got funding because we knew content marketing was going to get big, and we tried automating that, which became native advertising. And then, like any good startup should, we adopted a name that was closer to what the industry started calling it. But I think that's the answer, whether it's from us or someone else down the road, is that rest assured, technologies are going to be created to make this scalable. People are working on it. We have a platform. The message we get out there is we actually index 800 million page views a month of pure native inventory. People generally don't know that. We're primarily talking to agencies. But the scale is out there and it's growing. It's still early stages, but whether we solve, even if we didn't solve it, there'll be others behind us trying to solve the scale issue.
Can I jump in here for a second? Just from a brand perspective and what's holding me back, I can tell you exactly what's holding me back from actually investing more. And it's not actually the scale issue, but I love the scale issue. Love it, love what you guys are doing. What's holding me back as a brand is actually how you charge me for it. You charging me for cost per impression. And as a brand, I need to have my brand actually be seen in order for me to spend money on it. And so that's the piece that's kind of holding me back from doing more. And it's a very simple, very tactical, and just need to change how you charge for it.
So we love you too. So to clarify, we happen to charge on a viewable CPM basis, so everything is within view. So, and we think all advertising is eventually going to go there. So when you kind of dig under the deep undercovers of ad tech, you'll see why demanding viewable is so important. But it's important for us on native not only because it's a benefit to you guys, but also because it helps us be cross-screen. If you have a campaign that goes mobile, tablet, in-app, because we can do in-app, and desktop, we want to make sure that we can distribute the campaign and really kind of equalize all the different types of placements. And we can do that by making sure that at the very least, you're only charged once your content comes within view.
Solid. Do you have any housekeeping or anything like that? Should we just say thank you, everybody? Okay. Thanks, everybody.